In this message, I had the opportunity to preach on the story of Daniel in the lion's den. This story asks the question, how do you bring about change when you're not in charge and everyone disagrees with you? And this is a relevant question for today because it seems like with each passing day, our culture is less and less interested in the Christian's point of view on things. However, as I said in the sermon, I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. You see, throughout the Bible there seems to be a pattern. God's people are at their best, not when they're in power, but when they are speaking truth to those in power. Think about Moses before Pharaoh, David before Goliath, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before Nebuchadnezzar, Peter and John in front of the religious leaders. The list could go on and on. When the church stands firm on what's right and true, even in the face of opposition, that's when the world changes. This is exactly what Daniel does. The king of Babylon had conquered his people and brought Daniel and his friends into the palace. His goal was to make them into human propaganda, basically by turning them into Babylonians. And so he gives them new names, he teaches them Babylonian religion and literature, he treats them well in order to win them over. However, Daniel does not compromise his faith. He won't eat the king's food, and he continues to follow God, not the fake gods of Babylon. And yet, he's able to testify about God in the power center of the entire world. You see, the ability to speak truth to power is given to those who choose faithfulness over power. Daniel is a gifted guy. He's a hard worker, and so he gets promoted. And as a result, the king's other officers wanted to get rid of him. They form a plan. They ask the king to make a law that says anyone who prays to anyone other than the king will be thrown in the lion's den. Daniel hears the law, and guess what he immediately does? He goes into his room with the window open and prays to God, just as he always did. Now, the king was not wanting to appear weak before his people. He didn't want to throw Daniel into the lion's den, but he does it anyway. And God, of course, saves Daniel, closing the lions' mouths so that they don't eat him. King Darius comes the next morning to find that Daniel is alive and well, and he immediately makes decree that the God of Daniel is the true God, and he is the one that everyone should worship. Once again, faithfulness wins over power. You see, if you want to change the world, don't look for power. Look for a chance to be faithful before those in power. Daniel never made a grab for power. In fact, sometimes he refused it. But he never compromised his faithfulness to God. As a result, the world changed. There's one more thing that we should notice about this story. It's the fact that Daniel, while he was bold and courageous for his faith, was also good. Sometimes our zeal for a cause leads us to sacrifice our goodness. But Daniel honors the very king who threw him into the lion's den. How are you doing at honoring those that you don't like or who you don't agree with? How are you doing at speaking truth in love? How do we as Christians live out our beliefs in a world that can't seem to get along, that doesn't believe the same things that we do? These are some of the questions that we must ask ourselves. So have a great discussion with your group. In the sermon this week, I talked about the courage of some early Wesleyans to preach against the evils of slavery. People like Adam Crooks risked life and limb to combat this evil, even when they were met with significant resistance. One Wesleyan, named Micaiah McPherson, was hanged for his stance against slavery. His attackers, thinking him to be dead, cut him down from the tree, saying they needed the rope to hang another Wesleyan. But miraculously, he survived, and his wife nursed him back to health. He lived to be in his 80s. Now, these stories are part of our history at the Ransom. When you come to the Ransom, you enter this history in some way. The question is, how are we going to continue this fight for the oppressed and the marginalized in our world? What's fascinating is that some of the biggest opponents of the early Wesleyans were actually other Christians. These Christians had confused the gospel with their own political ideologies, and it caused them to do horrible things. Of course, No one ever thinks that they're guilty of this at the time, but today it's easy for us to look back and realize how wrong they were. Sometimes it seems our worldview is more influenced by culture than by God's kingdom. Daniel was able to see things clearly, though. It would have been easy to compromise a little bit and enjoy some of the luxuries of Babylon. However, he refused to let his faith be contaminated by the ideologies of his day. Yet, he was loving and good all throughout. I wonder how we're doing at this today. Now, this is a deep and difficult discussion, but it is one that Christians must have. If we are going to be change agents in our world, we must be able to separate what is the gospel from what is cultural and political ideologies. But we must also fight for what is right in a loving way. This is much easier said than done. Let's dig into this topic together now.